Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, there are a ton of new weapons that were added in with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC to Elden Ring. And while a few of them have been very clearly buildable and strong, the vast majority of them are a bit odd to work around, either due to just being weak sort of as a base or having such obscure stat requirements or actual buffs to make them properly function, and the most unfortunate of all of these are the legendary weapons that were added, the ones marked by the devs themselves as being extremely special. That said, being difficult to build around doesn't mean impossible by any means, and today I've got an extremely, sort of surprisingly strong build for the Sword of Light and the Sword of Darkness, together, in harmony. Two sides of the same coin, sword, I guess, wielded in tandem, and how do we make this work then? Well, they are both straight swords, of course, so you can use them together for the power stance moveset, and they actually both have a fair amount of holy damage on them at max upgrade 2. Combine that in with the weapon skills themselves being both a body buff that boosts specifically holy damage, and a cloud of darkness that shoots out, doing an honestly quite high amount of damage if you pump up faith, and then further also applying a resistance shred that makes anyone that is hit by it take 20% more holy damage. So you do 20% more holy damage, and your enemies take 20% more. Stacking these together for a massive boost to any holy damage done. You can use this on the Darkness weapon skill to apply massive damage, or even once these buffs are applied, even just the weapon hits themselves with a focus on faith as a stat start to do a pretty ridiculous amount of damage, because even though the faith scaling is worse than the strength scaling on this weapon, the faith scaling contributes to holy damage, which we can buff significantly. Wielding them power stance then lets us trigger multi-hit bonuses with the fast attacks as well, and that just sort of makes it scale up to the high heavens, with the only boss it doesn't really make feel like a training dummy being Radahn himself, which is a bit unfortunate, and even then it's only phase 2, where he gains a ton of holy resistance and generally just becomes very hard to get more than one hit in against at a time, which sort of hurts our multi-hit bonuses. Even then though, it is more than capable of actually killing Radahn. It just feels like a somewhat fair fight against him in phase 2, as opposed to most every other enemy in the entire game, where it feels absolutely bonkers strong with how much damage that it deals with every hit. All that said, let's dive into how to put it all together, where to get the pieces that you need, with the caveat that I will be assuming that you already have anything from the base game, and then we'll just talk about how to spend your stat points as you level up, and then just how to play the sort of buff cycle of the setup. Starting off then, we have the weapons themselves, and your first thought is probably, how do you get 2 of these in one playthrough? And the answer is, you don't through normal methods, though you can easily have a friend drop you their one if they aren't going to use it, or you can get the second one in a New Game Plus run through as well, quite easily. And if you don't want to do that, you can run mostly the same setup with just the coated sword from the base game, which is a full holy damage faith scaling weapon, which makes it work quite well within our setup, and you would just use either Howl of Shabiri or Flame Grant Me Strength as your replacement body buff, with the first one lowering your damage negation, but affecting holy damage, unlike Flame Grant Me Strength, which is only physical and fire. That said, if you can only have one of the 2 swords for your setup, you want the Sword of Darkness. As for how to get these then, first you need the Stone Sheathed Sword, and the 3 places that you can get this are the Fog Rift Catacombs, specifically once you reach the room along the path with the long multi-spike trap and the caster in the back. You can then climb up into the spike trap from the upper area and walk along it to find this overhanging sort of alcove with an altar in it where the Stone Sheathed Sword will be. Technically, it will be at whichever one of these altars you find first, but this is the best one if you get to choose because it's a pain to come back here again. The next altar then is the Ruins of Unte, near the Castle Watering Hole Site of Grace, and while the normal way in here is to bring the Furnace Golem in front of it back to life, you can actually just run around the backside and horse parkour into a hole in the wall without even needing to do that. The final altar then is in the Ruins of Rawa area to the northwest. Specifically, this is quite a long path from the Ancient Ruins West Site of Grace, so I'll just sort of let it play out. At this stage, you'll come across a completely invisible bridge that you are fully capable of actually crossing, and the final altar is here at the end. The first time that you bring a Stone Sheathed Sword to an altar, it will transform into one of the 2 legendary variants. Then you have to bring it to the other altar you've not visited yet to change it to the other one. And if you want to switch it back and forth, you have to revisit the altars that you did before. Which altar gives you which sword depends on the order that you do it, but if you did the order that we did, then going to the Ruins of Unte will always turn the sword into the Sword of Darkness, and the Ancient Ruins altar will instead turn it into the Sword of Light. Past that, you also have your sacred seals for casting. And in your left hand, you want the Erdtree seal, and this is what you'll be actually casting with, as we have 80 faith, and this is the best faith scaling seal at higher breakpoints. In your right hand, you want the spiral tree seal, which boosts spiral incantations, just to sort of help round the build out and give us a couple more ways to take advantage of our hefty holy damage buffs and our high faith. This comes from completing the Sacred Tower painting puzzle within the DLC, and we have a whole video dedicated to the painting puzzles that you can check out if you want actual help with it. Then we have our armor, and this is just full Rakshasa set if you want the full extra 8% damage of having all of these pieces on to really min-max your damage. Otherwise, your choice of fashion will work here to fit the concept for you. This armor set then, if you want to use it, comes from the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum and the boss inside of it, which is located near the Recluse River downstream site of Grace on the pathway down to the Abyssal Woods. It's just a short hop down from the Grace, down some gravel stones, and then around the cliff wall until you reach it. Following that, up is your Talismans, of course. The Shard of Alexander for a 15% boost to weapon skill damage anytime that we have the opening to use them, Holy Scorpion Charm for a 12% boost to holy damage at the cost of a bit of damage negation, and then for the weapon hits themselves, we have the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia Talisman, as well as Millicent's Prosthesis, both giving us a multi-hit bonus that increases our general damage output with every hit that we get in before stopping a combo. This fits well with Power Stance straight sword hits because they're just really fast, and our damage actually goes up quite quickly with this too. Moving on from that, we have our Wondrous Flask of Physic, and inside of this we have the Holy Shrouding Cracked Tear for an extra 20% holy damage, and then also the Thorny Cracked Tear for a further multi-hit attack bonus to stack up even further. You could also use the Bloodsucking Cracked Tear for a general 20% damage boost instead of, either of these, but it is a relatively small gain over the other two that we have here for the cost of, having your health constantly drained, which with this trade feels not quite worth it in my mind, as we have two other pretty solid tiers for this. Past that then we have our spells, Golden Vow for a 15% boost to all damage that you deal, and a 10% boost to damage negation for 80 seconds after you cast it. Blessing of the Erdtree is a lovely health regen spell that we can just use by virtue of having high faith to begin with, and then we can use any holy damage spells as a whole, especially the ones that count as spirals, being Golden Arcs and Great Golden Arc, new for the expansion, for some nice wide and reasonably long range holy pelting options that are buffed by all of our things. Though I do treat these as more of a bonus to the build rather than an intrinsic part of how it works. You won't really see me using it in a boss fight, though it is helpful if you want it. Then finally, for how to actually put it together, we have the stats and level ups that we actually spend, and for this you want to hit 60 vigor just to make damage intake feel a bit more reasonable, then 80 faith for our damage soft cap, 20 endurance for our medium roll threshold with Rakshasa armor and the rest of our equipment, and then the remaining points split between strength for a bit more physical damage and mind for a bit more comfort for casting, with 15 mind feeling just around the right spot personally if you are also using Radahn's Great Rune for bosses, which is my general recommendation. Finally then, we just have how to actually play this build. In most general combat, you can just sort of buff up and power stance attack with swords for loads of damage. Darkness skill is great area of effect attack if you are surrounded by a bunch of littler guys, and the damage that it does while buffed is insanely high, but the range on it is not that big despite being actually a circular spreading skill. For bosses and more challenging enemies, you want to buff up by using Golden Vow, then Blessing of the Erdtree, then you want to swap to the Sword of Light and put it into both hands. Drink a mana flask and your Wondrous Physic, use the Sword of Light's weapon skill, then go back to power stancing the swords and then enter the room. Use the start of the fight opening that you usually get with most bosses to use the Darkness skill and apply the Holy Resistance debuff, then suddenly your power stance attacks will deal a ton of damage, especially if you can find an opening to get more than a couple of hits in a row, as the multi-hit bonuses really start to stack up, as those actually boost all damage, which includes Holy, and thus stacks on top of all of our other Holy specific bonuses too, which is what makes the weapon hits on this build get so nasty so quickly. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A build based around the Swords of Light and Darkness. Obviously the Darkness sword is the sort of star of the show, but power stancing them together with the holy damage buff and debuff going at the same time really ups the damage of using these weapons together for just regular sword hits, and that honestly feels incredible to me, and I love how thematic it is too. These weapons were written off by most people as being pretty bad quite early on, but as it turns out, if you ignore the fact that they have C strength scaling, don't put any strength into it all, and just go fully into faith and holy damage, they're actually ridiculously good against anything that isn't, heavily resistant to holy specifically. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoyed trying this out for yourself too if you choose to do so. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage.
is, goodbye.